I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, a good deal or extortion? Ukraine agrees to grant access and revenue from its mineral wealth to the US. But what will it get in return? And will the deal help Washington reduce its dependence on China? Germany is stuck in stagnation. Manufacturing, the main driver of its economy, is faltering. So, is the nation's business model in danger of breaking up? And can a new government fix it? Billionaires amassed more than the combined wealth of the poorest third of the world's population, and that's in just the first month of the year. So what's behind the extreme inequality gap, and can it be bridged? They are seen as the foundation of the economy of the future. Critical minerals are crucial for the production of high-tech products, including electric vehicles, mobile phones, AI infrastructure, and weapons. It's estimated that nearly 5% of the world's raw elements are in Ukraine. Kyiv has agreed to jointly develop its riches, including oil and gas, with the US, and set up an investment fund for Ukraine's reconstruction. Ukraine also wants guarantees on security and money for weapons. The US wants to break China's grip on the world's mineral supply chains. But is it a win-win deal, or is Ukraine being exploited? Alexandra Byers reports.
For decades, Ukraine's been known as the breadbasket of Europe. But it's also one of the continent's most mineral-rich nations, holding vast reserves of elements needed to power technology, like lithium and titanium, essential for batteries, aviation, and military industries. Anything with a microchip needs a rare earth mineral, and rapid advances are powering a global race to develop and source these key raw materials. The ground beneath Ukraine is believed to hold 5% of the world's total reserves, worth an estimated $12 trillion. The U.S. has just a fraction of that. And for years, China's been the world's #1 supplier. For America, the world's biggest economy, that's become more and more of a problem.
It's an economic and national security risk. There are not so many American companies who are able to mine and produce rare earths within the U.S. And in order to avoid that, the Chinese will take over Ukrainian rare earths commodities and build up potential mines there. It's an option for the Americans.
But more than half of those deposits are now in Russian-occupied territory, where the worst of the fighting still rages. Last year, the Ukrainian president presented a victory plan to Western partners. Foreign firms could gain access to that mineral wealth in exchange for continued support and help bringing an end to the war.
Ціни цьому реально немає.
These deposits are priceless. They're worth huge amounts of money. Huge. That is why we need to protect it. So if we're talking about a deal, that's what the Americans want. Then let's do a deal.
U.S. President Donald Trump has been pushing for access, but he wanted it to be in return for aid he claims the U.S. has already given Kyiv.
Biden was throwing money around like it's cotton candy, and it's a very big deal. Look, it could be $1 trillion deal, it could be whatever, but it's rare earths and other things.
Zelensky refused to sign an agreement that would have given the U.S. $500 billion worth of Ukraine's resource wealth, but no security guarantees. But then, Democratic Republic of Congo and Russia made offers of their own.
We would be ready to offer our American partners, when I say partners, I mean not only governmental and administrative structures, but also companies, an opportunity for joint work if they showed interest. We undoubtedly have significantly more resources of this kind than Ukraine.
Trump says he'd be willing to do deals with Russia, too, only adding to European fears over warming ties between Washington and Moscow. The minerals deal is at the heart of Zelensky's push to win U.S. support. He's made it clear his priority is peace and security for his country, but any agreement has to benefit both sides and protect the future of generations of Ukrainians. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Gracelyn Bascaran. She's director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Good to have you with us, Gracelyn. Is this deal a win-win for both sides, or is Ukraine being exploited somehow? Did it have any choice?
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's definitely a very exciting time in the world of minerals diplomacy. So I think there's one really big point worth noting, which is that the deal now looks very different to the deal that was initially being negotiated. Originally, for example, President Trump wanted to be repaid for $500 billion of military aid through, mineral resources. However, there was a lot of controversy around that figure. President Zelensky wouldn't agree to it because he said, well, you haven't given us up 500 billion. We know that figure to be closer to 128 billion. Now, President Zelensky, however, didn't see any security guarantees included, which he was really hoping for. So the final agreement is a much softer landing spot that, a fund will be set up where future resources, so not things that are currently being mined, but future resources, 50% of the revenue they generate will go into the fund. But again, it can be used for investment in Ukraine. Personally, while I think that, President Zelensky didn't really have a choice if he wanted to continue kind of having the support he needs in the face of conflict, but I do think that he came out with a much better deal. The U.S. is not going to secure minerals from this in the next year or two because he negotiated that it's only for future assets. That means that not only do we still have a lot of mapping to do of Ukraine, but on average, from the time that we identify a deposit to the time that it's producing is 18 years. So the U.S. is kind of in it for the long run here, but in the shorter term, President Zelensky has an agreement with support from the U.S.
Is there any kind of precedent for this sort of deal? Has it been done before?
It's not really a tool out of the U.S. foreign policy playbook, but what we've seen is already that President Trump has very aggressively incorporated minerals into foreign policy, annexing resource-rich Canada, going after Greenland for rare earths, Ukraine for rare earths. There is precedent from other countries, however. So when we look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, back in 2007, after the conflict, China negotiated a $3 billion infrastructure deal, whereby they gave the DRC $3 billion in exchange for access to $93 billion of cobalt and copper in Kolwezi. And obviously, we've seen that the DRC has been a very strategic place for China where they've established that dominance. So there's some precedent elsewhere, but it's new for America.
And what are the implications of the fact that many of these minerals are under territory that is currently occupied by Russia?
So there's a lot of minerals on occupied land. There's a lot of minerals not on occupied land. So there's minerals all around Ukraine. Ukraine is mineral rich. You have a country that has about 0.4% of the world's land and 5% of the world's resources. Now, it's important to note a couple of things. One of the big red flags that we've seen in the last couple of days is that President Putin is looking to cut his own minerals deal, not only with minerals in Russia, but in Russian occupied territory that's not actually his own. Donbas has a lot of resources, but we know at least a third of what sits on that land is probably coal, which is a little bit less of a resource that, we're chasing after, fiercely at this moment. But more broadly is the resources are across Ukraine. The question is will the private sector go in given the challenges on the land?
And if the US is able to source these resources from Ukraine, what does this mean for China?
Ultimately, China has currently, let's look at rare earths as an example, because it's where a lot of the rhetoric has focused in the negotiations. Rare earths obviously being vital for, national security because they're in defense technologies, advanced semiconductors, and energy technologies like wind turbines. China currently holds processing capabilities for 90% of the world's rare earths, but they don't actually have that much. They have about a fourth of the world's rare earths, and then they strategically source from across the world and process them. A project that like this starts to create a competitor. Rare earth processing facilities are extremely expensive to build, but in the last 5 years, the U.S. government has spent $300 million under Trump 1 and Biden to build rare earth separation facilities in Texas and California. However, because we have less than 1.5% of those rare earths, we are sourcing them or looking to source them from other places. What we're hoping to do is have an alternate supply to China, but China will still be dominant for many decades to come.
Grayson, it's been great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
The German economy, the world's third largest, was once the envy of Europe. It's now seeing global rivals race past it. GDP has barely grown since the pandemic, and the nation has been in recession for the past 2 years. The manufacturing sector, which was traditionally considered Europe's powerhouse, is faltering. Exports are falling, and companies are slashing thousands of jobs as they struggle with rising costs. Many experts say the German economic business model is broken. But is it? We'll discuss that with our guest shortly. But first, Dominic Kane reports from the city of Wetzlar.
A crowd of Continental workers gathers outside their workplace in Wetzlar. Many of them have been told their jobs at the car parts giant are going, although they are trying to fight the decision.
Last year, we still thought around 300 employees would be transferred to 2 other locations, Badenhausen and Frankfurt. And then in January, the decision was made not to do that anymore, but to completely eliminate all the jobs here.
Which means a bleak outlook for many of these people.
Look at all the people here. They've bought houses or made plans. People's lives and families depend on it, and it's all being wiped out in one stroke.
Like everyone else, I'm losing my job. I started training here and never imagined this. I thought I could carry on working here for a while because I was enjoying it and it was going well.
The job losses here are symptomatic of the problems the automotive industry has been facing in recent times. But it doesn't stop there. Many German industries are struggling to remain competitive, with millions of people unemployed and millions more worrying about their futures.
At a time when Germany has fallen behind in new technologies while labour costs remain high. Many German experts say the economy is stagnating. So what can an incoming government do about it?
So the great expectation of German firms is that there's a more clear economic policy. So when we look at the last months, we have seen a lot of uncertainty among firms, and firms are looking forward to have a clear picture with respect to economic policy. That's what firms are looking for.
The political parties agree something must be done, but not what. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, in Western Germany.
Well, joining us now from Brussels is Matthias Bauer. He is Director and Senior Economist at the European Centre for International Political Economy. Good to have you with us again, Matthias. The incoming government certainly has a lot on its plate. What should its priorities be, economically speaking?
Well, the CDU is in the driving seat in, having a coalition negotiation with the Social Democrats. Much of what it will be suggesting will certainly rely on its Agenda 2030, which foresees tax cuts, a relaxation of bureaucracy, a few tweaks here and there as concerns the single market. And it will be very challenging to press through these demands with the Social Democrats. In my eyes, we should not so much talk about the relaxation of the debt rate, but really strive for bold, potentially unprecedented reforms, meaning that structural reforms should be set on very up on the priority list of reforms. Tax cuts for workers, tax cuts for businesses, reduction in social security contributions, energy security leading to lower energy prices compared to what we see right now. All that will be very hard to swallow for the Social Democrats, but I think this is what the German government, the next German government, if there will be a next German government composed by the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, needs to push for.
So, Matthias, what's gone wrong for Germany? Is the German economic model broken? Why has German industry failed to remain competitive?
Yeah, okay. German economic model, it's of course a big theme these days in Germany, being widely discussed. Many Germans, my fellow citizens here in Germany, they are very much concerned about the state of Germany's economy and where it is heading to in the future. I wouldn't say that everything is bad. So we still have many companies that do well, export companies, services sector companies, small and medium-sized companies, including large companies that are still leading in global niche markets. We still have a well-functioning labor market, high employment, rising real wages. But at the same time, over the past 12 months or so, we've seen many flagship companies, the big names in advanced manufacturing, the big names in Germany's automotive industry, starting to lay off people in Germany, starting to close down plants, and not only postponing investments in Germany, but also announcing that they will, in the future, invest more outside Europe than in their own country of headquarters. And many people in Germany, hearing these stories, they are increasingly feeling insecure.
Do you see Germany returning to its status as the economic powerhouse of Europe anytime soon?
Germany will most likely remain the economic powerhouse of Europe, but it will never get back in the position that it held in the decades following World War II. The world has changed. So Germany will probably manage to maintain a sound industrial base. There will be a few industrial leaders here and there in manufacturing, in the automotive industry, the services industry. But global competition is going to intensify further. There will be much more internationally competitive companies that will be much more competitive than German companies, alone for the reason that companies in these two jurisdictions, China and the United States, they have in front of their doorstep a large single market where companies can scale to competitiveness, to international competitiveness. And that's a very different story in Germany. We do not have a single market in the EU.
Matthias, many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Super. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, while Germany's economy is faltering, Portugal is expected to be a clear outperformer in Europe this year. Economic growth is accelerating, mainly driven by the tourism industry. The nation's aiming to attract foreign investment to grow its economy even further. However, like the rest of the EU, it faces potential US tariffs. The Portuguese Prime Minister has slammed Donald Trump's threats, but how much clout does Portugal really have globally? I spoke earlier with Ricardo Aroca, the chairman and CEO of ICEP, the Portuguese Trade and Investment Agency, and began by asking him that very question.
We are rising in terms of our importance on the global stage. Indeed, Portugal today can be a platform for global outreach to many different countries, many different continents. We have the traditional sectors in which we have specialized over the previous decades. And at the same time, we have increasingly new sectors which are modernizing, which are becoming ever more competitive on the international scene. So at this current time, I think that Portugal has a great opportunity to bridge that road from being a great touristic destination into being also a very good place, excellent place to do business.
You export more to Germany than you import. How important to Portugal is Germany as an economy? How important do you think Germany is still to the EU in terms of economic growth?
Well, Germany is obviously still a major powerhouse in terms of the economy, and will remain so because...
But I was going to say, you say it will remain so. Do you think it really can? We've just had an election in Germany, of course. So what do you think the priorities for Germany's new government will be?
Well, the priority in Germany is more or less a common theme around Europe. Europe, for the previous decades, has specialized in so-called mid-technologies, and the challenge for European countries is indeed to migrate from mid-technologies into high technology, in which the US and China have been able to focus more in the recent past. Although when you look at the contextual conditions, the background conditions, what you see is that indeed in Europe you have highly qualified people, you have a borderless market in the EU, so it's a huge market, and then you have these countries that provide, such as Portugal, that provide platforms for other continents, for other regions of the world where there are cultural affinities, where there are past cultural links, and in that perspective, I think that Europe is a competitive force and will remain so. But obviously, we have to have more investments in these frontier technologies, such as nanotechnology, such as synthetic biology, such as robotics, such as AI. The things that the public perception today associates more with the US and China, but that indeed in Portugal and overall across Europe we can also do.
Portugal may be a dynamic, expanding, growing economy right now. I mean, can that be said, though, of the whole of the EU to a certain extent? As you say, it's playing catch-up behind the US and China. Can it ever, you think, be an equal in terms of economic power to the US and China?
Well, we all understand that the administrative background of Europe is different from the US and obviously from China as well. So there are idiosyncrasies in Europe that must always be understood. But that said, what we see in Portugal is that the export side of our economy has grown from 30% of GDP 15 years ago to 50% of GDP as of today. The foreign direct investment still continues to flow, and indeed in the recent past, we've been able to attract investments from countries that until now were not, having Portugal really on their radar, and that today they are.
President Trump seems intent on upending the world economic order. Does Portugal see that as a threat or an opportunity?
Well, we see that the current trade between the US and Europe is very dynamic. Between the two countries, we have the most favored nation principle. So basically, we have very low tariffs from both sides. So there's nothing to reciprocate about. But indeed, what we see is that the economic linkages between the two continents are very strong.
So you don't see President Trump's Make America Great Again protectionist policies as dangerous in any way?
Well, I think that the world should remain, as cooperative as possible. So free trade benefits all in the end, and trade protectionism, as theory tells us and as history has told us, is indeed a tax on companies, on consumers. So in Portugal, we strive to remain open, very friendly, and we try to be smart as well.
Ricardo, it's been great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
In 2024, an average of nearly 4 new billionaires were minted each week, bringing the total to more than 2,700 super-rich people globally. Their wealth is ballooning. It surged by $314 billion in January alone. That's an increase of $10 billion a day. That's more than the combined wealth of 2.8 billion people who make up the poorest third of humanity. The super-rich movement says that it would take 15 million workers an entire year to collectively earn that same amount of money. Well, more than 50 international organizations are calling on G20 governments to follow through on their pledge to ensure the super-rich are taxed. Last year, the group's finance ministers agreed to cooperate to tax the wealthy more fairly. The organizations are also urging G20 leaders to invest the billions of dollars raised in tackling poverty, climate crises and ending extreme inequality. South Africa, which now holds the G20 presidency, has called for inequality reduction to be placed at the heart of economic policy making. Joining us now from Gran Canaria is Alex Cobham. He's the chief executive of the Tax Justice Network. Good to have you with us, Alex. Why is it that the fortunate few have been able to amass such a huge amount of wealth?
Look, we live in a time when, compared to 50 or 80 years ago, we've seen this public narrative pushed by, corporate lobbyists and wealthy individuals, particularly controlling large parts of the media, that somehow we need very significant extreme wealth in order for our economies to work better. In fact, all the evidence shows exactly the opposite. Our economies work better, deliver stronger growth and better outcomes for us as human beings when we have lower inequality. And that's why we used to have very high marginal tax rates on extreme wealth, on very large corporate profits, rates as high as 80 or 90%, even in some countries. They've come right down. We've had this race to the bottom over decades, particularly since the 1980s. And the effect of that is not that we've seen higher growth. Of course, we haven't. If anything, growth has slowed and stagnated over that period. What we've seen is a rise in rampant inequalities that are associated with all sorts of worse outcomes for us as societies, including falls in life expectancy and reductions in the rate of progress on things like public education availability. This inequality, or this set of inequalities led by the extreme wealth of billionaires, is really damaging our societies. And increasingly now we see it damaging our democracies too. You only have to look at around the world to see a set of countries where that political power associated with the extreme wealth of billionaires is really starting to undermine all of our abilities to choose governments and to hold those governments to account.
So how do you go about taxing the super rich when wealthy individuals are able to hide their wealth across various jurisdictions and in incredibly complicated financial structures and tax havens? How do you get rid of tax havens?
So look, all of these issues are about basic transparency. Are we able to see who is the ultimate beneficial owner, the warm-blooded human being behind a company or a trust or a foundation or a partnership or another legal vehicle? Once we have that information in the public domain, then we cut through all of this. It's almost impossible for places to operate as tax havens, because it's not just offering a low tax rate to money that's been brought from somewhere else. It's ensuring secrecy so that the tax authorities in those other countries can't see who the owner is. If we end that secrecy, we really cut through this. So that means we need public registers of the beneficial owners of companies, every company that's set up, or trusts and other legal vehicles and so on. We need that information in the public domain. And look, we need that publicly anyway, because markets don't work better when some of the participants in markets are hiding who they are. We know this is a recipe for corruption and market rigging and so on. So both for the market and for the state to work properly, for states to be able to tax everybody fairly, instead of letting some of the wealthiest people step out of taxation, even as they benefit from being part of our societies, simply isn't sustainable. And, as I say, the only way we'll really address those inequalities is by ensuring transparency and making sure that goes cross-jurisdiction.
Alex, it's been great to have you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thanks very much.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, I'm at @Finnegan on X. Try to remember to use the hashtag AJCTC, or you could drop us a line. Countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire editions for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.